The conference room on the 43rd floor of the Caldwell Group headquarters had floor-to-ceiling windows, and on a clear morning you could see all the way to the river. Nobody was looking at the river. 11 people sat around a table long enough to park a car on. 11 people who had not slept well, who had not eaten properly in days, who had watched a company worth $380 million dissolve like salt in warm water. Their eyes were fixed on the woman at the head of the table. Emma Carter set the pen down on the paper. Not yet. She picked it up again. The light in the room was wrong for the hour too bright, the overhead fluorescents doing what fluorescents do, which is to make everything look like evidence. The faces around the table had that quality too. Photographable. Fixed. People in the middle of something they would remember for the rest of their careers, not because it was good but because it was the kind of morning that marks you. Outside, a maintenance cart rattled softly down the corridor. Nobody heard it. "Miss Carter." The attorney's voice was gentle, the way voices get when the news is final. "The filing deadline is noon. We have 40 minutes. Emma looked at the signature line. Her name, printed in clean serif font, Emma Renee Carter. Below it, the words she had been building toward for 18 years and never once imagined she would arrive at. Voluntary Petition for Bankruptcy, Chapter 11. She pressed the pen to the page. From the far end of the room, near the credenza where the coffee had gone cold, a voice said, "You missed a number." The pen stopped. Every head turned. A man stood in the doorway to the service corridor, the one that connected to the building's maintenance wing. He wore a gray uniform with a patch on the chest. His hands were clean. He had wiped them on a rag that hung from his belt, but there was a faint streak of machine oil along his left forearm. He was holding a wrench loosely at his side. The way a person holds something they forgot they were carrying. Nobody in the room knew his name. "Excuse me?" Emma said. The man did not step back. He looked at the projection screen, where the consolidated balance sheet had been frozen for the last 20 minutes while the lawyers argued. He looked at it the way you look at something you already understand. "Line 47, he said. "The depreciation recapture on the Atlanta assets. It's been double counted. Pull it out, and your net liability drops by $11.3 million. Silence. Then someone laughed. Just one person. But it was enough. Emma Carter had been described, in various profiles and industry pieces over the years, as relentless, exacting, difficult to read. One writer had called her a closed system, meaning she gave nothing away, took everything in, processed it alone. She had not found this unflattering. She had built the Caldwell Group from a mid-sized regional logistics firm into a national operation handling freight contracts for 11 states. She had done this in 9 years, which was fast enough to make people suspicious. She had done it without a co-founder, without family money, without a mentor who opened doors. She had done it by being right more often than she was wrong, and by accepting the cost of being wrong with a steadiness that looked, from the outside, like coldness. She was 36 years old. She had not taken a vacation in 3 years. She kept a standing desk in her office because sitting felt like stopping. The trouble had started with a single acquisition. 14 months ago, the Caldwell Group had purchased a southeastern freight company called Ridgeline Logistics for $112 million. The deal had looked clean. The due diligence had taken 4 months. Emma had signed off on it herself. What no one had caught, what the auditors, the lawyers, the investment bank, and Emma's own CFO had all failed to catch, was that Ridgeline's revenue figures for the prior 3 years had been constructed with enormous care. Not fabricated outright, restructured, reordered, presented through a series of holding company transfers that made a deteriorating business look like a growing one. By the time the truth surfaced, Ridgeline's actual operating liabilities had been absorbed into the Caldwell Group's books, and the number was catastrophic. $167 million in debt, against assets that, when properly valued, came to $151 million. She had run the numbers herself 4 times in the first week after the scope became clear. Not because she doubted her team, but because she needed to see it with her own hands. She had sat at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a legal pad, and worked through every scenario: sale of assets, accelerated revenue collection, emergency capital raise, bridge financing, and at the end of each one, she had arrived at the same place. Not enough. The arithmetic was not on her side, and Emma Carter had never been the kind of person who flinched from arithmetic. The building manager, Peggy, had hired him without asking too many questions, which he had appreciated. She had looked at his application, looked at him, and said, "You're overqualified, but the job is real, and the hours are honest, and I don't have time to manage people who think they're above it." He had told her he understood. She had believed him because it was true. The work was physical and repetitive, and required a kind of attention that was different from financial analysis, but not lesser. Systems had their own logic, their own failure modes, their own elegant solutions. He had come to respect that. He had come to find, over 14 months, that there was something clarifying about work that you could see and touch, that you could evaluate by whether the unit ran or didn't, whether the temperature held or didn't, whether the thing you fixed stayed fixed. Emma had spent the first month not sleeping, and the second month not eating properly, and the third month firing the CFO who had led the due diligence, and the fourth month in depositions. She had spent the subsequent 10 months trying to restructure, renegotiate, and rebuild. 3 of her largest freight contracts had not renewed. 2 lenders had accelerated their terms. The board had begun holding private calls without her. On the morning of the 43rd floor meeting, she had been awake since 3 a.m. She had showered, dressed in a charcoal suit, and driven herself to the building because she did not want anyone to see her face in the back of a car. She had taken the elevator alone. She had walked into the conference room at 7:58 and set her legal pad on the table and said good morning and meant none of it. By 9:15, everything that could be said had been said. The restructuring plan had failed to attract new capital. The bankruptcy attorney had the petition ready. The board members who had bothered to show up in person were looking at their phones. The ones on video call had their cameras off. Emma picked up the pen. She had built something. For 9 years, she had built something, and now she was going to sign her name to its ending. And the strangest thing was how quiet the room was. Nobody crying. Nobody angry. Just quiet, the way things get when they are already over. She pressed the pen to the signature line for the second time. The maintenance man was still in the doorway. Daniel Hayes had been working the early shift in the Caldwell Group building for 14 months. He arrived at 5:45 each morning, clocked in at the service entrance on the building's north side, and spent the first hour of his day in the mechanical room on the 4th floor, running checks on the HVAC system before the building filled up. He was 39. He had a daughter named Claire, who was 9 years old, and kept a notebook where she wrote down questions she intended to ask him when he got home. The notebook had a green cover. Last week's questions had included: why is the sky different colors at sunset? What does compound interest mean? And do you think fish know they are wet? He had answered all 3. He was good at answering questions. The other maintenance staff knew him as quiet and reliable, and not particularly interested in conversation. He showed up when he said he would. He fixed things correctly the first time. He did not complain about the hours, which started early and sometimes ran long. The building manager, a brusque woman named Peggy who had been doing the job for 20 years, had told him once that he was the best hire she had made in a decade, and he had thanked her and gone back to the task at hand. The Caldwell Group occupied floors 38 through 45. Daniel worked those floors on Tuesdays and Thursdays, servicing the equipment in the server room, the climate controls in the executive wing, and the mechanical systems in the 2 large conference rooms on 43. He had been doing this for over a year. He knew the layout of those floors, the way you know a familiar road without thinking about it, just moving through it correctly. He had noticed things, over the course of 14 months. The way the executive assistants went quieter as the months progressed. The way the legal team started arriving earlier and leaving later. The way the CFO, the new one, a thin man named Graham, who wore expensive watches, had begun carrying a leather folder everywhere he went, clutching it the way people clutch things when they are afraid of losing something. He had also noticed the documents, not intentionally. They left things in conference rooms, printouts, tablets left open, whiteboards not erased. Daniel worked in those rooms after hours and in the early something that was sitting in plain sight. He had looked. He had understood what he was looking at, and he had kept that understanding to himself, because it was not his business, and he had chosen, deliberately and with full awareness of the cost, to make it not his business. He had a reason for that choice. The reason had a name, and the name was Claire. The choice had cost him things he had not fully tallied until years later. Not the money he had not missed, the money the way he thought he might, but the sense of identity that the work had given him. In finance, you were always your position, your book, your year-end number. Strip those away, and the question of who you were became genuinely interesting, which was both harder and better than he had anticipated. He had spent the first year after leaving simply being Claire's father, which turned out to be a full-time project and then some. She had been a demanding infant, and then a curious toddler, and then a child who asked questions faster than he could answer them. And he had found, to his surprise, that he liked this version of his days considerably more than the previous one. That morning, the 43rd floor conference room had an equipment issue. The ceiling-mounted climate control unit had developed a vibration that was audible at low frequencies, not loud, but present, a low mechanical hum that the executive assistant had flagged the previous afternoon. Daniel had come up at 6 a.m. to assess it and determined that it needed a part replacement. The part was in his cart. He had planned to complete the repair before the 8 o'clock meeting. He had not finished in time. The meeting had started while he was still in the service corridor, adjacent to the room. The door propped open 3 inches for ventilation access. He had kept working. He could hear everything. He had listened to the lawyers explain the petition. He had listened to the board members ask their questions. He had listened to the CFO, Graham, confirm the figures in a voice that carried the specific flatness of a man who has already moved on in his head. Daniel had been staring at the projection screen through the gap in the door for 4 minutes when he saw it. He stopped moving. He set down his wrench. He looked at the number again. The way you look at something when you... He was not making a mistake. He stayed in the doorway for another full minute, not moving. Claire's voice came to him, not as a hallucination but as a specific memory. From 2 Sundays ago, when they had been sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework, and she had looked up from her worksheet and said, completely unprompted, "If you know something important, you have to say it, even if it's scary. That's what being brave is." He had told her she was right. He picked up the wrench. He walked to the doorway. He looked at the room full of lawyers and board members and executives, all of them staring at him with the particular contempt that people reserve for those they consider invisible. "You missed a number," he said. The man who laughed was named Preston Alcott. He was the Caldwell Group's longest-serving board member, 70 years old. And he had been in rooms like this one many times. He knew how these mornings ended. He had a flight to catch at 2 o'clock. "Son," he said, in the tone of someone explaining something to a child, "I don't know how you got in here, but this is a private meeting. Whatever you think you saw." "Line 47, the man said again. He had not moved from the doorway. His voice was the same. Not louder, not defensive, the same. "The depreciation recapture on the Atlanta facility group. It's been included in both the operating losses and the capital account write-downs. That's an $11.3 million double count." Graham, the CFO, looked up from his folder. Something moved across his face, not fear exactly, but its precursor. The thing that comes before fear when a precise mind encounters a precise challenge. "That's an absurd," he began. "Pull up the Atlanta asset schedule," the man said. "Compare it to the depreciation table in Appendix C. The recapture figure appears in both." Silence again, a different kind. Emma had not moved. She was still holding the pen. She was looking at the man in the doorway, and she was doing the thing she did when she was thinking seriously, which was nothing. Absolutely nothing. No expression, no movement, just looking. He was not nervous. That was the thing. A man who had wandered into the wrong room would be nervous. A man who was performing confidence would be performing it. You could see the effort underneath. This man was not nervous and was not performing. He was simply standing there, the way you stand when you know where you are. She had seen people try to assert authority in rooms like this one. She knew exactly what that looked like. The lifted chin, the controlled volume, the careful enunciation that was meant to signal education and competence. She knew it because she had done it herself in the early years, before she learned that authority was not performed but inhabited. This man was not performing anything. He was just there. "You have 2 minutes, Emma said. Preston turned to her. "Emma, 2 minutes, she said, without looking at him. The maintenance man walked into the room. He did not apologize for his uniform or his wrench or the streak of oil on his forearm. He walked to the presentation laptop at the center of the table, pausing briefly, and looked at the keyboard, then at Emma. "May I?" She nodded once. He navigated to the appendix files with the speed of someone who had used similar systems before. Atlanta Asset Schedule. He opened it. He opened the depreciation table. He placed them side by side on the screen. Then he pointed. The room looked at what he was pointing at. Graham's jaw tightened. He opened his folder. He looked at the numbers. He looked at the screen. He looked at his folder again. The maintenance man stepped back from the laptop. He had been at it for 90 seconds. "The recapture amount," he said, "appears in the operating loss schedule as an income reduction, and then again in the capital write-down as an asset adjustment. Both are legitimate accounting treatments for that type of asset sale, but they capture the same economic event. You can't count it twice." He paused. $11.3 million has been subtracted from your net position twice. Add it back once, and your gap closes to $5.7 million. That's not solvency, but it's restructurable, and it changes the conversation you're having this morning considerably. He stopped talking. He had said what he came to say. Preston was no longer looking at his phone. There are moments in a meeting when something shifts, and everyone in the room feels it before anyone says it. The air quality changes. The way people are sitting changes. People who were looking at their phones put their phones away. This was one of those moments. Graham said, very quietly, "I need to verify this." "I know," the maintenance man said. He had moved back to stand near the wall, out of the center of things, as if he were returning to where he naturally belonged. Graham was on his laptop for 4 minutes. Nobody spoke. A junior attorney started to say something, and Preston touched his arm, and he stopped. Emma sat very still. She was doing arithmetic in her head, not with the numbers specifically, because she did not have them memorized well enough for that, but with the logic. If the double count was real, then the net deficit was half what they had been operating on for the past 6 weeks. The restructuring plan they had abandoned in February. The one that 2 of the lenders had declined because the numbers were too far gone. Would it have worked at $5.7 million? She thought it might. She thought it very likely might. She did not look at the maintenance man. Graham set down his laptop. He took off his glasses and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. A gesture Emma recognized as the one he made when he had to say something he did not want to say. "He's right," Graham said. "It's there. Appendix C, Schedule 4B. The Atlanta recapture is in both tables." More silence. Then Preston said, with a kind of slow dignity, "How did this get past the audit team?" "I don't know yet," Graham said. Emma finally looked at the maintenance man. He was standing near the credenza where the cold coffee was. He had put his wrench in the pocket of his uniform, or tried to. It was too long and stuck up at an angle. He was not looking at anyone in particular. He was looking at the floor with the expression of someone waiting for a conversation to be over, so he can go back to what he was doing. "What's your name?" Emma said. He looked up. "Daniel Hayes." "How did you see that?" He considered the question carefully. The way people do when they want to be accurate rather than impressive. "I've been looking at those documents for a while. You leave things in this room. I work in this room." He paused. "I've seen that depreciation table 3 times in the last month. The schedule in Appendix C didn't match the first time I saw it. And it still didn't match today. You remembered the figures from a month ago. He met her gaze without apology. Emma looked at him for another moment. Then line on the table. Postpone the filing, she said to the attorney. We have things to review. Emma, this is a maintenance worker who looked at a printout, Preston began. Who was right? Emma said. Her voice was quiet and absolute. Get me the full audit file. I want everything from the Atlanta acquisition on my desk in 20 minutes. And someone find Mr. Hayes a chair. Nobody moved immediately. Then, slowly, they did. Emma cleared the room except for Graham and a junior analyst named Petra, who was 24 years old and had a particular talent for moving quickly through spreadsheets without making errors. Daniel Hayes stood at the corner of the table because he had declined the chair. They worked for 2 hours. The double count was only the beginning. Daniel walked them through 3 additional issues, not errors exactly, but choices. The way certain revenue recognition had been accelerated in the Ridgeline acquisition documents. The way a contract with a regional carrier had been valued at future projected revenue rather than current contracted amounts. The way a debt restructuring agreement from 3 years ago had been reported in a way that technically complied with accounting standards and yet obscured 60% of its practical effect. Petra pulled up each document as Daniel referenced it, her fingers moving with a quiet urgency. The kind that comes when someone is trying to keep up with a mind moving faster than they expected. Graham had his own laptop open. He cross-referenced as Daniel spoke. And twice he made a sound, not a word, just a sound that meant, yes, I see it now. The afternoon light moved across the table in degrees. Nobody got up to turn on the overhead lights. Nobody wanted to interrupt. He explained it without condescension and without showing off. He explained it the way you explain something when your goal is for the other person to understand it. Not for them to see that you understand it. Petra took notes at a speed that suggested she had been waiting for someone to explain these things clearly. Graham sat across the table and said very little. His expression was the expression of a man recalibrating something. He was not a bad CFO. He was, Emma suspected, a good CFO who had inherited a bad situation and had been working inside it for long enough that he had lost the ability to see it from outside. What Daniel was doing was showing him what the documents looked like to someone who had come to them fresh. At 11:40, Daniel stopped. There's more work to do, he said. The lender agreements need to be modeled against the corrected figures. Some of the vendor contracts may have different implications once the revenue base is properly stated. But the core picture is different than what you were working from this morning. Emma looked at the revised summary Petra had been building in real time. The deficit, restated, 5.8 million. Real, but manageable. The kind of number that lenders could be brought back to the table on. If the conversation were reframed, the kind of number that a restructuring firm could work with. Where did you learn to do this? Emma said. He was quiet for a moment. I used to work in finance. Used to. Yes. She waited. He did not add anything. She did not push. There was something in the way he had said it, the past tense. The completeness of it. The absence of bitterness or regret that made pushing feel wrong. He had offered what he was willing to offer. Thank you, she said. And meant it, which was not something she said often or lightly. He nodded. He looked at the clock on the wall. I have a unit on 39 that I need to get back to. The part's been sitting in the corridor since 7, despite everything. Despite the 4-hour morning that had just remade the context of everything she was dealing with. Emma almost smiled. Go, she said. He went. She had him looked up that afternoon. Not as a surveillance action, she was not that kind of person, but because she needed to understand what had just happened. And understanding things was how Emma Carter was built. The building HR file on Daniel Hayes said he was 39, that he had been hired 14 months ago, that he had excellent performance reviews and no absences, and that the building manager had flagged him as a retention priority. There was a previous address in the Alderview neighborhood. One current address near the elementary school on Hartfield, and an emergency contact listed as Claire Hayes, which was unusual. Most adults listed another adult with a note that said daughter. That was all the file said. She ran a professional background search, the kind her HR team did for senior hires. What came back was more. Daniel Hayes had spent 12 years at an investment bank called Meridian Capital Partners, working in structured finance. He had been a director. The public record of his work was partial structured finance. At that level is not well documented in accessible databases, but what she could find suggested he had been good at it. Very good. He had left Meridian 7 years ago. There was a gap of 2 years in the employment record. Then the maintenance work. She found a brief mention in an archived industry newsletter, a sentence, nothing more, noting that Daniel Hayes had stepped away from his role at Meridian following a personal loss. No details. The newsletter had not considered the details important enough to include. Emma sat with this for a while. She thought about the way he had stood in the doorway that morning, the way he had not been performing his knowledge, not trying to impress anyone, not trying to recover from the contempt in the room. He had said what he saw, and then he had waited for someone to look. She thought about choosing to work as a maintenance technician in a building where people left financial documents in conference rooms. She thought about the daughter whose name was on the emergency contact form. She did not know what had happened 7 years ago. She knew, with a clarity that was not sentiment but simply accurate reading, that whatever it was had been large enough to make him choose a different life entirely, and that he had made that choice and lived inside it without visible regret. She called the building manager at 4:30. "I'd like to speak with Daniel Hayes," she said. "Not as a Caldwell Group matter. Building business. Can you let him know I'm available this afternoon? He's finishing up on 39, Peggy said. I'll send him up when he's done." He came up at 5:15, still in his uniform, the wrench replaced by a smaller tool she didn't recognize. He sat in the chair across from her desk without being invited to, which she appreciated. "I looked you up," she said, without preamble. "I figured you would. You were good at what you did." "Yes." "And you left." "Yes." She studied him. He returned the look with the same quality of patience he had had all day, not waiting for her to finish. Exactly, but not in a hurry for anything. "Settled. What happened?" she said. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was not going to answer. Then, "My wife died. And I had a 9-month-old daughter. And I looked at the life I had been building, and I decided it was the wrong one." Emma said nothing. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I said what I needed to say this morning. That's finished." "I know," she said. "I'm not offering you anything. I just wanted to understand." He nodded slowly. "Now you do." She asked him, 3 days later, whether he would be willing to consult. Not full-time, not a title, not a salary restructure or an office or a business card. A specific ask. She needed someone to go through the Ridgeline acquisition documents, all of them, every filing, every exhibit, every amendment, and map exactly where the representation had diverged from reality. She had lawyers doing this. She needed someone who understood the financial logic, not just the legal exposure. She told him she would pay him at a consultant rate for his hours. She told him it could be evenings and weekends, that it did not need to interfere with his primary job. She told him it was a bounded project, with a defined end point. He asked for a day to think about it. He came back and said yes, on the condition that it would not run past 9 p.m. on weeknights. Because Claire went to bed at 9, and he liked to be there for it. Emma said that was fine. They worked together for 6 weeks. He came to the office on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, when the floor was mostly empty, and sat in the small conference room adjacent to Emma's office, with a stack of documents and his laptop. Sometimes Petra was there. Sometimes it was just Emma and Daniel, and the particular quiet of an office, at 8 in the evening, when the rest of the world has moved on to other things. He worked the way he talked, precisely, without excess, with a quality of attention that Emma recognized as rare, because she possessed it herself and knew how uncommon it was. He did not speculate. When he was not sure, he said so. When he found something definitive, he presented it without drama, the same way he had presented the double count on the morning of the meeting. They argued sometimes. Emma was not built for passive agreement, and Daniel was not built for it either. And there were evenings when they sat across the table from each other, with the same document open on both their laptops, and came to different conclusions about what it meant and had to work it out. These arguments were she recognized this later, not at the time some of the more satisfying professional conversations she had had in years. He did not agree with her to be agreeable. He pushed back when he had a reason. When she was right, he said so. When he was right, he just waited. One Thursday evening in October, they disagreed for 40 minutes about the proper treatment of a contingent liability from a Ridgeline subsidiary. Emma's position was conservative. Daniel's was more aggressive, and, she eventually conceded, more accurate. He had not pressed the point when she conceded it. He had simply moved on to the next item, which was its own kind of respect, the recognition that she did not need to be thanked for admitting she was wrong. She filed this away. She filed a great many things about him away. She learned things about him the way you learn things about someone you work closely with in the evenings, in small pieces, between tasks. He had grown up in a mid-sized city in Ohio. He had gotten a scholarship to study mathematics. He had ended up in finance because someone had shown him that mathematics and finance were the same kind of thinking, dressed differently. He had been good at it. He had been, for a certain period, entirely consumed by it. He had a photograph of Claire on his phone. Emma saw it once, when he was scrolling to find a document. The girl had his same quality of stillness. She looked like she was thinking about something. She asks a lot of questions, he said, noticing Emma's look. That's a good quality, Emma said. I know, he said. I'm never sure I answer them well enough. But you try. He looked at her for a moment. Yes, I always try. By the end of the 6 weeks, they had a document. It was 112 pages, thoroughly sourced, mapping every material misrepresentation in the Ridgeline acquisition from initial pitch to close. It identified the specific individuals at Ridgeline who had constructed the misrepresentation. It quantified the exposure at each stage. It identified 2 insurance policies that the prior legal team had not flagged as potentially applicable. Emma's attorneys read it and went quiet in the way that attorneys go quiet when something is better than what they would have produced themselves. The document became the foundation of the litigation strategy. 18 months later, the Caldwell Group would recover $41 million in a settlement with the former Ridgeline principals and their insurers. By that time, the company would be restructured, profitable, and operating with 30% fewer employees than at its peak, a number that still cost Emma sleep, but viable. Genuinely viable. None of that was visible yet. On the evening they finished the document, it was just Daniel printing the last section on Emma's floor printer, while Emma read back through the summary, and Petra, who had been there for most of it, ate cold takeout from a container she had forgotten was on the table. That's it, Daniel said, setting the pages on the table. Emma read the last page. She set it down. This is good work, she said. Yes, he agreed, without false modesty. It is. She looked at him across the table. He was putting his papers in order, straightening the stack, doing the finishing tasks of a finished job with the same care he applied to everything else. I want to offer you a position, she said. Before you say no, he paused, looked up. Chief Restructuring Officer would be the official title. It's a project-specific role, 18 months, and then you'd have the option to convert to a permanent CFO function or to end the engagement. Either way. She paused. The salary is significant. It would be the kind of money that changes your options, not just your immediate situation. He was quiet. I know what you're going to say, she said. Do you? You're going to say no. He considered this. Yes and no, he said. The life I have works for me. I built it carefully. I'm not going to disrupt it for a salary. He picked up his pen. But I'm listening. She told him the terms. All of them. She told him about the remote work flexibility, the hours, the fact that he could set his own schedule as long as the work was done. She told him she understood about 9 o'clock. He listened to all of it. He did not take notes, which meant he was holding it in his head, which she had learned by now was as reliable as notes would have been. I'll think about it, he said. It was not a no. For Daniel Hayes, she had learned. That was something. She came on a Friday afternoon in late October, 3 weeks after the document was finished, during the period when Daniel was still technically a consultant, and the position question was unresolved. Emma was in a meeting with the litigation team when her assistant, a steady woman named Rose, knocked and opened the door. "There's a child in reception," Rose said, with the measured tone she used when situations were unusual but not alarming. "She says her father works here." "Daniel Hayes?" Emma excused herself. Claire Hayes was 9 years old and sat in one of the lobby chairs with her backpack in her lap and her feet not quite reaching the floor. She had dark hair, and her father's particular quality of quiet, the kind that reads as self-possession rather than shyness. She was reading a book. She looked up when Emma came through the glass doors. "You're not my dad," the girl said, not unkindly, just accurate. "I'm Emma Carter. I work with your dad. Are you okay?" "My after-school program ended early," Claire said. "Dad forgot his phone this morning, so I couldn't call him. I took the bus here because I know the address." Emma looked at her for a moment. 9 years old, on a city bus, navigating to a correct address, sitting calmly in a corporate lobby with a book. "Does your dad know you can do that?" Emma said. "Do what?" "Navigate here on your own." Claire thought about this. "Probably not. Specifically. He knows I know the bus system because we practice." Emma called down to the maintenance floor. Daniel arrived in the lobby 4 minutes later, and the look on his face when he saw Claire was the look of a parent who has experienced fear and relief in the same moment and is working to keep both off his face for the child's sake. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Claire said. "I took the 14 bus." "I know," Rose texted me. "Are you hungry?" "A little." Daniel looked at Emma. "I'm sorry. I'll take her home." "Stay," Emma said. And then, to Claire, "We have decent snacks on this floor. Would you like to see the office while you wait?" Claire looked at her father, who gave a small nod. Then she looked at Emma with the frank assessment of a child who is deciding whether to trust someone. "Okay," she said. "Do you have a view of the river?" 43 floors up, Emma said. "Best view in the building." Claire picked up her backpack and stood. They went up together, the three of them, in the elevator. Claire stood between them and looked at the numbers changing and did not say anything. Emma had the impression the girl was thinking about something she would write in her notebook later. At the window, Claire looked at the river for a long time. Then she said, "You can see where the current changes direction. Right there, at the bend. See how the water is a different color?" Emma looked. The girl was right. She had not noticed that in 3 years of working on this floor. "Your dad tells me you have a lot of questions," Emma said. "He keeps a list," Claire said, still looking at the river. "We go through them at dinner." Emma looked at Daniel. He was watching his daughter at the window with the expression of someone who has built something they are proud of and knows, in their bones, that it is the most important thing they will ever build. She looked away, back at the river, at the place where the water changed color. He took the position, not the full version she had offered. They negotiated which she had expected, and which was, in its way, satisfying, and arrived at something that was closer to a senior consulting arrangement with a defined structure and clear exit provisions. He would work 3 days a week in the office. The other time was his. The hours were his to manage. 9 o'clock was inviolable. He did not take an office. He worked from the small conference room adjacent to hers, the same one where they had spent 6 weeks on the Ridgeline documents, and she found that she had become accustomed to the light being on in that room in a way that registered, at a level below thought, as something good. The board was skeptical, Preston Alcott asked, at the first meeting where Daniel's role was formally presented, whether they were really proposing to give significant authority to a man who had been working as a building maintenance technician. Emma looked at him across the table with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to engage. "He found an $11 million error that your audit team and your CFO and your law firm all missed," she said. "What specifically concerns you?" Preston did not have a specific answer for that. The restructuring process was not easy. Emma had not expected it to be. There were creditor calls that ran until midnight, weeks when the outcome seemed genuinely unclear, days when the data pointed in one direction and instinct pointed in another, and you had to decide which one you trusted. She and Daniel worked through most of it together, in the conference room or over the phone, with the particular efficiency of two people who had learned each other's working patterns and stopped wasting time on what didn't need to be said. He was not warm, exactly that was not the word for it, but he was honest, which was better. When he thought she was wrong, he said so, plainly and with reasons, and she had learned to receive this as the professional courtesy it was. When he thought she had made a good decision, he acknowledged it without excess. There was no flattery between them. There was, instead, something that functioned like respect, which is rarer and lasts longer. In March, 7 months after the morning she had nearly signed the bankruptcy petition, the Caldwell Group completed its restructuring filing. The revised figures, the ones built on a corrected accounting of the Ridgeline acquisition, supported a viable reorganization plan. 3 of the company's 5 major lenders agreed to the new terms. The other 2 were persuaded at a meeting Emma ran for 4.5 hours without a break. The afternoon the final agreement was signed, Emma sat alone in her office for 20 minutes, after everyone else had gone to celebrate in the conference room down the hall. She could hear them muted voices, the particular pitch of relief. She sat at her desk and looked out the window at the river, and thought about the morning she had almost signed a different document in a different room. She thought about 11 people and a table long enough to park a car on, and a maintenance cart rattling in the corridor that nobody had heard. There was no press release about Daniel's role. He had not asked for one, and Emma had not offered. The financial press covered the restructuring as Emma's achievement, which was partly true and partly not the whole story, which is also partly true of most achievements. One afternoon in April, Emma came back from a board meeting to find a note on the table in the small conference room. A piece of paper from his legal pad, his handwriting precise, slightly left-leaning. It said, "I've been thinking about the Atlanta question. The insurance claim covers more than we filed. I'll walk you through it on Thursday." She read it twice. Then she set it on her desk, not in the recycling, which was not something she did with many pieces of paper. On a Saturday in May, Claire came to the building again, intentionally this time, with a list. Not questions, a list of things she had observed about the city from the bus routes she used. Things she thought were worth noting. The way certain intersections had trees on 2 sides but not the others. The way the light on the river changed by hour of the day. The way the old warehouse district, 3 stops from her school, had 2 buildings that were being converted but one that had been left exactly as it was, with a mural on the side wall, and she wanted to know why. She showed this list to Emma, who read it carefully. "This is good observation," Emma said. "Dad says observation is the beginning of understanding," Claire said. "What do you think it leads to?" Claire considered. "Questions. And then you try to find the answers. And then you have more questions." "That's about right," Emma said. Daniel was at the window, looking at the river, not part of the conversation and not excluding himself from it either, just present in the way he was present in most things there, and paying attention, without needing to be the center of it. Emma looked at him for a moment. He turned from the window and caught her looking. And she did not look away. And neither did he. And nothing was said, because what would be said, if anything, was not going to be said yet. There was time. There was work still to do. There was a child with a notebook full of questions, and a father who always tried to answer them, and a company that was, slowly, carefully, becoming itself again. That was enough. For now, that was enough. 6 months later, the settlement with the former Ridgeline principals was announced. The terms were confidential. What became public was the amount. $41 million. Paid to the Caldwell Group. Emma gave an interview about it to a financial publication. She was measured and precise, and gave credit to the legal team and the restructuring process and the company's employees who had stayed through the difficult months. The interviewer asked, "Was there a turning point? A moment when you knew the company was going to survive?" Emma thought about this. "Yes," she said. "One moment. Someone showed me a number I had missed." She did not explain further, and the interviewer, sensing a closed door, moved on. That evening, Emma was still at the office at 6:30, which was earlier than she used to stay, because she had been making adjustments, small ones, to how she arranged her days. The light was on in the small conference room. She could see it through the glass. She thought about what she would say at the board meeting next week, where she would have to account for the past 18 months in the compressed, forward-looking language that boards required. She would be precise and measured and give appropriate credit and then move on to the next quarter. But in the 20 minutes of quiet before the celebration down the hall absorbed her again, she let herself be simply grateful. It was not an emotion she allowed herself often. She was careful with gratitude, the way you are careful with things you know you cannot afford to take for granted. She knocked twice, which she did now, which she had not done before. "Come in," Daniel said. She went in. He was at the table with a document open and a cup of coffee he had made himself in the floor kitchen, because he had learned where things were. He looked up. "You should go home," he said, not unkindly. The way you say something to someone when you have started to notice their patterns. "I know," she said. She sat down across from him, not because there was a task, but just because it was 6:30 and the document could wait. "How is she?" He set down his pen. The evening light came through the windows at a low angle, the way it did in April, and the river was visible in the distance. And if you looked at the right place, you could see where the current changed direction. She finished her notebook, he said. The question one. She started a new one. What's in the new one? He considered. Observations, mostly. She's moved on from questions to looking. That's good, Emma said. Yes, he said. It is. The city was going amber outside the window. Neither of them moved to leave immediately. There was time. There was always time if you decided to take it. Emma looked at the river. She looked at the place where the water changed color. She had not noticed that. Once. She noticed it now.